This is video history from the J. Bay Jacobs Library for the History of Obstetrics and Gynecology in America. It's a fine spring afternoon in San Francisco, California in the year 2005. My guest this afternoon is Robert C. Park. I can hardly say that without saying Colonel Robert C. Park. It seems to pop right into my mind. A longtime supporter of ACOG and our 38th president, Bob. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
What we mainly like to do in these interviews is to find out where all you went and what all you did and what you think. So we'll let you feel free to express your opinions, any thoughts that you have about ACOG as you go along. But let me begin by asking you a little bit about your career.
Mm-hmm.
You were born where?
Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Now, was that
home of Jim Thorpe?
Was that a military association in Carlisle? It was not. It was not. Okay.
No, my dad was a county supervisor of agriculture.
Okay, and is it fair to ask you what year that was?
1932.
1932. Okay. And what went on in your early life after that in Carlisle in terms of schooling and the courses that interested you and the sports that interested you, that sort of thing?
Well, I went to grade school and high school in Carlisle. We had sort of a small farm, so I raised some chickens early on, and rabbits. We lived right across from the hospital.
Who I suppose we're using them.
Yes, and I raised rabbits for hospital work, and they didn't destroy them or anything.
No,
They'd give them back, and I'd feed them and keep them on. My mother's sister was the superintendent nurse at the hospital.
Rabbits were kind of the classic pregnancy test in those days, weren't they?
That's all they had, I think.
What time? And how long were you in Carlisle? Did you stay there on through high school and college days?
Stayed on through high school, played high school football, basketball, and ran some track.
Is it fair to ask what position you played on the football team?
I was a quarterback, and of course in those days you played both ways.
That's right.
And a defensive halfback. But the quarterback, we hadn't started the T stuff yet. We were sort of halfway in between that.
So you were always wondering where he was going to center the ball when the play
That's
started. Did you have a particular interest in medicine during that time, or what was it that sparked your interest in a career in medicine?
Well, part of it, my association with my aunt at the hospital as I was growing up. I used to mow the lawn over there, I think for a quarter an hour, and actually did some work later in the summers in the lab. And I got to know an orthopedic surgeon quite well who I kind of admired.
In my day, I washed walls in the hospital for 25 cents an hour, so we've got a common background, I guess. When you got along in the time in high school, when it was time to decide about going to college, what did you do?
Well, I looked for a decent pre-med school that I could afford, or that the family could afford, and Franklin and Marshall in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, still is well known as a pre-med, was quite well known back in 1950 when I first started there.
Were you past the time? I guess you were past the time when you were subject to the draft then, or were you in the college years?
Past World War II draft.
But not.
But Korea, as you know, came up in the early 50s. So we there was some subject to the draft for some of the people.
How long were you at Franklin and Marshall?
4 years.
4 years, and you went to medical school where?
Went to medical school at Hahnemann Medical School in Philadelphia, and finished there in 1958.
And then you must have gone, or presume you went on into obstetrics and gynecology at that time.
No, not right off. The summer of my junior year, I was employed at a place called Lower Bucks County Hospital, which is north of Philly.
I've heard of it.
And there I got to know a couple of obstetricians and actually delivered a fair number of babies. And so I became one of the 5 first interns there in '58.
They just started a
graduate
medical, what we'd call graduate medical education today.
Correct.
Then, and I suspect it was a 1-year
1 year
internship.
1 year.
And what then?
Well, we talked about the draft and Korean War and so forth. In my sophomore year, it became pretty obvious that you probably were going to have to face military service at some time. And back in those days, they had what was called the Senior Student Program, which if you committed to the service, instead of owing 2 years, you owed 3.
Okay,
but they paid as a second lieutenant for my senior year, and then I had the choice to either intern in or out of the service, and I wasn't going to stay in, so I opted to intern out, and of course, as we said, at Lower Bucks County.
Did in this arrangement with the military, you got 1 year of pay and then you owed them 2 years?
Well, I owed 2 years for the draft and one additional year for the year they paid.
Did you get any, but having been in this program, did that help you with any special consideration in terms of choices of places to go or hospitals, things of that nature in the military?
Yeah, it sure did. Because of the association at Lower Bucks with some obstetricians, I had a bit of interest there, but I really wanted to be a general practitioner, I thought. And I was going to stay in that area once I got out of the service. I got into the service and was promptly sent to Fort Sam for orientation.
Many of us have seen that, yes.
Yes. And then to Korea. The war was over, and actually I initially ran a little dispensary in Seoul, Korea, as they were building what became known as the Seoul Military Hospital. And while I was there, I got the opportunity. I'd gotten married when we were in medical school, and by now had 2 children. And I got the opportunity, instead of serving just 1 year, to bring the family to Korea and serve 2 years. And so I moved to a place called Daegu, which is halfway down the peninsula, and ran a military dispensary there for about 14 months.
Did you have any MD help there, or were you on your own?
I did. There was one other physician. I was in what was called the dependent, because it was a dependent housing area, and it was a dependent dispensary. And I had a colleague at the on the actual military post who had the active duty service dispensary.
How far was that south of the 38th parallel?
Oh,
Quite a ways?
well, it was halfway down a peninsula.
Okay.
And Seoul was, I don't know, 30 miles, something
too far.
like that.
Okay. And you were there how long a time in total?
I was totally in Korea for 2 years.
Then where did the career take you?
Then, because I wanted to get back to the Philadelphia area, I requested and got an assignment to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, actually as a pediatrician, because that's what they needed.
Yeah.
While I was in Korea, at Seoul Military Hospital, once they were set up, they had specialists, of course, and I met an obstetrician gynecologist who had trained at Letterman under a gentleman named Colonel Ed Zimmerman,
Yes.
who I know you knew very well.
Many of us knew.
And he knew I had some interest in OBGYN, and he said, "You've got to go talk to Colonel Z," who by then was at Walter Reed. So I got to Fort Monmouth, and I decided I wanted to do OB-GYN, but I still wasn't sure I wanted to stay in the military. So I went and interviewed with Colonel Zimmerman at Walter Reed, and he on this, of course I had 3 years experience, or pretty close by then, and he on the spot accepted me for a 3 or 4 year. It was 1962, and if you remember, that was the year of the transition. So I could do either 3 or could do a year of surgery and then 3. And I said, let me think about it, because unknown to him, I also had an appointment with a gentleman who you know well, Dr. Wilson.
J. Robert.
J. Robert, who
Wilson.
at the time was at Temple in Philadelphia. And we had a very nice interview, and I never forget this. And while Dr. Wilson was alive, we talked about this a number of times. I said, I have interviewed, you know, I'm in the service, I can get out this summer. I have interviewed with Colonel Zimmerman at Walter Reed, and he said he would accept me. I said, I still am not sure I want to stay in. Dr. Wilson said, Dr. Park, if I had a chance to go to Walter Reed and work for Colonel Ed Zimmerman, I would do it. Also, and this isn't known, I have accepted a job at Michigan. So
Yes,
I will not be here to.
Yeah.
So that,
There you were.
there I was. That
Did you have
decided me.
Did you have a military obligation then following the Walter Reed?
Yes,
Year for
year
year.
for year. So I had finished there in '65 and had a 3-year obligation.
And beyond the end of the residency, what happened then?
Then
you-
I was assigned to Fort Carson.
Okay, you got it. Did you get a choice or?
Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty much.
Pretty much, because I had spent the year in Korea, and I got assigned to Fort Carson, which is in Colorado Springs, still active. And after a year, was chief of a small OBGYN department there.
You rose to the top in a hurry.
Yes. Well, and of course, I've been in for a while. I was a major when I got there, made lieutenant colonel after about 2 years, I think.
Yeah, trace out for us the rest of your military career then.
Well, then it really becomes quite interesting. Vietnam had started. And I wasn't, at Fort Carson, I was happy with what I was doing, but all the neat stuff, cancer, that's not neat, but make a diagnosis of cancer or some...
The interesting patients, right?
Patients I had to send to Fitzsimmons in Denver because they had more experience and some people with some extra training. So I went back to Washington and talked to my old mentor, Colonel Ed Zimmerman, and said oncology was just coming around then, this is 1967 timeframe, as a potential subspecialty. And of course, we had done a lot of that at Walter Reed, and I said, I really think I'd like to, at some point, come back here for a year and do oncology. And he said, why just 1 year? Come back for 2. However, I'm going to have to send you to Vietnam for an interim year, if that's
what you want to do.
If that's okay with you. And so I took him up on that. I went to Vietnam. Actually, was in charge of a medical battalion for almost, I think I was there 364 days, just south of, trying to think, Busan. No, that's Korea.
That's Korea. We'll accept it.
We'll accept it, the names. And then came back and was assigned to Walter Reed and participated actually for 2 years, did some research and oncology training. During that time, Colonel Zimmerman retired, a fellow named Warren Pateau, who I think you know, and was also a very accomplished surgeon. And he eventually retired, and by then I was a full colonel, and they made me the chief.
What year was that?
That was about 1978.
And you were there then?
I'd been there 9 years.
And stayed there, did you not, for the rest of your career?
Well,
I remember you there.
Yes. Yeah. I always had a position at Walter Reed. At about the mid-1980s, I actually took a part-time position in the Surgeon General's office as Chief of Consultants and Ambulatory Care. And had a number of people that worked under me. However, I still spent half time at Walter Reed and was still able to conduct the oncology fellowship program.
In the midst of all these things, how did you get involved with the college?
Well, again, as you know, Colonel Z was vice president twice, I think, back in the days when they had...
He replaced somebody, that's correct.
Yes. Yep. And you just had to. He said, you know, if you're going to be, if you're going to be involved with me, you're going to be involved with ACOG.
Okay. Well, good for him.
Yes. No, he was.
And as you moved on into ACOG, were you district chairman for the Armed Forces District?
I was section chairman for the Army, followed by district chairman for the Armed Forces District, about 88, 89 time frame, I think. And program chairman for the college.
And your presidency year was?
1988
88
to 1989.
Where was the annual meeting that year?
Boston.
During your presidency?
It was Boston the year I was inaugurated, and Atlanta. My last, the year I ran the meeting.
And of course, being the president of the college is clearly not the end of your career, or we hope of anyone's. What things did you do, or did you maintain doing after a year as president? And then I'll ask you a little bit more about the presidency.
Okay. I retired. I was active duty when I became college president. Mm-hmm. And I did that on purpose. I could have retired the year before, but being the first Armed Forces District President, I thought it was important to be able to wear the uniform. So I was inaugurated in '88 and retired that fall. And then the year I was past president, I also became chair of what's called the Gynecologic Oncology Group, mm-hmm. which, as you know, is a National Cancer Institute funded cooperative research
and treatment program,
right. Which still exists.
And very importantly so, right.
Yes. And I retired from that in '92.
And what then happened with your career when you and the military retired?
Well, actually, I through most of the '90s stayed on as sort of a one-day-a-week participant at Walter Reed, and actually ran the fellowship program for a couple more years till we got some qualified people in to take that over.
What do you remember mainly about your presidential year? What were the things that at that time seemed most important that you were doing as the president?
Well, significant sort of things. I was fortunate enough to conduct the first executive board meeting in what is now the current headquarters and is called the Warren Pearse Building, I believe.
We didn't need to say that. That's all right. Now that was, of course, if you didn't come in at the beginning of the move to build our own building, but you were there at the culmination.
Well, actually, I did partly because I was vice president for Harry Jonas, when Harry Jonas was president.
Well, that was...
But it was officially opened the summer of '88.
Yeah, it was a key moment because it was certainly one of the best decisions that the college ever made in terms of organization and continuity.
Yes.
What all have you done in the years since you've retired?
Well, other than the GOG
the fun things,
business, well, for some time I've had a very small involvement in horse racing. And
do you own horses?
I own some horses, actually, currently a stallion and a couple of mares and some very young ones and two that are old enough to race.
And that keeps you busy.
Well, my son runs that,
Okay.
and so it's not real busy for me, but it's kind of fun.
How many children do you have?
Two.
And your son is the eldest?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And the second child is?
Is Susan, and she is a social worker at the Washington College in Chestertown, Maryland.
Oh. Well, I know where that is. An excellent small school, indeed.
And,
fine location.
Nice location.
It's been a long and very effective career, Bob. in doing it. Would you want to pick a highlight, or is it all a highlight?
Well, I think certainly as regards the college, I think I'm very proud of my presidential address, which was ethics, if you remember.
Yes.
And may I mention Mort LeBeau,
Please.
who was extremely helpful in that. And but to this day, every now and then I'll run into somebody that says, you know, that was one of the best presentations. So I really feel very good about that. And of course, I'm extremely proud to have been the first, hopefully not the last, Armed Forces District President.
We are proud to have had you, and I think you've recited for us a most successful and productive career, and we're glad that the college got an important part of it. My friend,
Well,
Robert.
thanks so much.